Inside the mind of a Roman emperor. Have you ever wondered what happens when absolute power meets a mind that cannot bear it? When the man who rules the world begins to lose control of the world inside his head? Rome, the eternal city, the beating heart of an empire that stretched from the burning sands of Africa to the cold mist of Britannia. In the 1st century after Christ, Rome was not merely a city, it was the world. And at the center of that world sat an emperor whose mind was a labyrinth of brilliance, cruelty, and madness. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known to history as Caligula. This is not a story of mere tyranny. It is a story of how absolute power, divine delusion, and human fragility confuse into something monstrous and magnificent. The boy who would be God. He was born in 12 AD, the son of the celebrated Roman general Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, granddaughter of Augustus himself. The blood of emperors flowed through his veins. But what Rome didn't know was that within this boy, nicknamed Caligula, or Little Boots by the soldiers, burned a mind both brilliant and broken. When Caligula was just 7 years old, his father, Germanicus, died mysteriously in Syria. Many whispered that he had been poisoned on orders of Emperor Tiberius. The young boy watched as his mother and brothers were arrested, exiled, or executed under suspicion of treason. Caligula alone was spared, because Tiberius saw in him not just a child, but a potential tool. For years, the boy lived under the shadow of the emperor's paranoia, learning to mask his emotions behind a serene smile. In his heart, however, grew the seed of vengeance, a cold, silent hatred for the empire that had destroyed his family. The golden prison of Capri. At age 18, Caligula was summoned to Tiberius's villa on the island of Capri. The emperor had retreated there, surrounded by astrologers, philosophers, and perversions. It was said that the villa was less a palace and more a labyrinth of sin, where Tiberius indulged every dark impulse that power could afford. Caligula watched and learned. He learned how fear controlled men better than law. He learned that loyalty was a lie bought with gold. And most of all, he learned that the emperor was not a man, but a god among mortals. Tiberius, nearing death, would often say, "I am nursing a viper in Rome's bosom." He was right. For in 37 AD, when Tiberius died, some say suffocated by Caligula himself, the young man inherited the greatest power on earth. Rome rejoiced. Senators wept in joy. Crowds filled the streets chanting, "Caligula, Caligula." The boy who had survived Tiberius's terror now sat upon the throne as Emperor of Rome. For the first few months, it was as if the Golden Age had returned. Caligula granted amnesty to political prisoners, abolished unfair taxes, and staged massive games to honor the gods. The people adored him. Coins were minted bearing his radiant face. Poets called him the new Augustus. But then something changed. The fever of power. In the autumn of his first year as emperor, Caligula fell gravely ill. For weeks, Rome waited in terror as rumors spread that the emperor was near death. And then, miraculously, he recovered. But he was not the same. Those who saw him afterward whispered that his eyes burned with a strange, unearthly light. He began to speak of visions, of voices in the night that told him he was not merely emperor, but a living god. He began to walk through his palace in silence, muttering prayers to himself. He ordered statues of himself placed beside those of Jupiter and Mars. He demanded that people worship him as Neos Helios, the new sun. The transformation was terrifying. He summoned the Senate and declared, "The gods of Olympus have chosen me to rule not as man, but as deity. Henceforth, the Emperor of Rome is divine." No one dared to oppose him. The senators bowed, trembling. The soldiers shouted his name, and from that moment, the empire ceased to be ruled by reason. It was ruled by madness.
The games of a mad god. Caligula's reign became a theater of horror and spectacle. He spent fortunes building marble temples dedicated to himself. He paraded through the streets dressed as Apollo, then as Venus, commanding Rome to worship each new incarnation of his divinity. He forced senators' wives to attend his feasts, then humiliated them publicly. He would invite nobles to dine and, mid-banquet, ordered their execution, then continue eating as their blood stained the marble floor. Once he declared war on the sea itself. Gathering his legions on the shores of the English Channel, he ordered them to attack the waves and collect seashells as spoils of victory. "Behold," he told them, "the treasures of Neptune." But beneath this madness lay something darker, a mind haunted by fear. Caligula saw enemies everywhere. He trusted no one, not his guards, not his advisors, not even his own family. His paranoia turned his palace into a fortress of mirrors and traps. He executed his cousin, Gemellus, for breathing wrongly. He exiled his own sisters, accusing them of plotting against him. Yet to the common people, he was still a figure of fascination. He staged magnificent games at the Circus Maximus, where thousands of gladiators fought under golden banners bearing his image. He flooded the Colosseum with water to reenact naval battles. Rome was entertained, but also horrified. They had given a man the power of a god. Now that god had begun to lose his mind. The bridge to immortality. Among his most bizarre obsessions was his dream of defying death itself. Caligula ordered the construction of a floating bridge across the Bay of Baiae, stretching nearly 2 miles. Thousands of ships were lashed together and covered with sand to create an artificial roadway across the sea. For 2 days, the emperor rode back and forth across the bridge on horseback, wearing a golden breastplate once worn by Alexander the Great. When asked why, he replied, "To prove to the gods that nothing is impossible for me." He believed he could outshine every conqueror before him. He wanted to erase the line between man and God, between power and eternity. But even his most loyal followers began to whisper that the emperor's soul was cracking. The horse and the throne. One of the most famous and disturbing symbols of Caligula's reign was his horse, Incitatus. The emperor loved the animal more than most men love their children. He fed it oats mixed with gold flakes, housed it in marble stables, and dressed it in purple robes. He told the Senate, "Incitatus shall be consul of Rome." Whether it was madness or mockery, no one knew. Perhaps he was showing them how meaningless their titles had become, how one man's whim could destroy centuries of Roman order. Or perhaps he truly believed his horse could rule. Descent into darkness. By 40 AD, Caligula's cruelty reached its peak. He ordered the construction of a palace dedicated to himself as the living god, directly connected to the temple of Jupiter. He demanded sacrifices in his name. He even replaced the heads of ancient statues with his own likeness. But the empire was collapsing under the weight of his insanity. The treasury was empty from his extravagant games. Soldiers went unpaid. Provinces rebelled. Famine spread through the streets of Rome. And still, he laughed. He would walk through the empty halls of his palace at night, whispering to invisible gods. He once said, "Let them hate me, so long as they fear me." It was no longer an empire. It was a nightmare painted in marble and blood. the conspiracy. Among the soldiers of the Praetorian Guard, those sworn to protect the emperor, whispers turned into plans. Led by Cassius Chaera, a hardened officer whom Caligula had humiliated repeatedly, the guards plotted to end the reign of madness. On January 24, 41 AD, the emperor attended a performance in a palace theater. As he stepped through a narrow corridor, laughing and boasting, Chaera and his men struck. Blades flashed, the god screamed like a man. When it was over, Gaius Caligula, emperor of Rome, lay bleeding on the marble floor, stabbed more than 30 times. His body was dragged away and hastily buried in a shallow grave. The Roman people did not mourn. Some rejoiced. Others whispered that he had merely transformed, that the god in him had ascended, leaving behind only the broken shell of a man. Legacy of madness. In the centuries that followed, the name Caligula became synonymous with madness and excess. Historians painted him as a monster. Philosophers cited him as proof that power corrupts absolutely. But fragments of truth remain buried beneath the legend. Some scholars believe Caligula's illness permanently damaged his brain, triggering seizures and psychosis. Others say his so-called madness was an act of calculated terror, a way to shatter the Senate's power and elevate the emperor beyond human law. But whatever the truth, one fact is clear. Caligula embodied the peril of limitless authority. He showed the world that when a man is told he is a god long enough, he begins to believe it. And when he believes it, he ceases to be human. Epilogue. The mind that shaped an empire. After Caligula's death, his uncle, Claudius, became emperor. He restored stability, rebuilt the treasury, and tried to erase the memory of his predecessor. But Caligula's shadow lingered. The empire would never again trust its rulers fully. Every emperor that followed, from Nero to Commodus, carried echoes of his madness. And perhaps that's Caligula's true legacy. Not his cruelty, not his temples, not his golden bridge, but the warning that absolute power isolates the mind, twisting it until even gods go mad. So the next time you think of Rome, its marble, its glory, its empire that ruled the world, remember this: it was built not only by reason and law, but by the fragile minds of men who believed they could outthink the gods. Because inside every emperor's crown, there lies a battlefield, the war between power and sanity.